Hey everybody, I'm back. So my iPad died, so now I'm trying to record these on my phone. Quality's not as good as my iPad, but hopefully you'll be able to hear me and hopefully it'll be okay. So we're going back to the Bridge to Terabithia. Okay. It's chapter 3. It's called The Fastest Kid in the 5th Grade. Remember, we've got our two main characters so far. We know mainly about Jessie. But then in the last chapter, we were introduced to Leslie Burke. All right. The fastest kid in the 5th grade. Jess didn't see Leslie Burke again, except from a distance, until the first day of school the following Tuesday. And when Mr. Turner brought her down to Miss Meyer's 5th grade class at Lark Creek Elementary School. Leslie was still dressed in a faded cutoffs and the blue undershirt, and she had sneakers on her feet, but no socks. Surprise swished up from the class like a steam that it was released from a radiator cap. They were all sitting there primly dressed in their spring Sunday's best. Even Jess wore one of his pair of corduroys and an ironed shirt. The reaction didn't seem to bother her, though. She stood there in front with her eyes saying, "Okay, friends, here I am," in answer to their open-mouthed stares while Miss Myers fluttered about trying to figure out where to put an extra desk. The room was a small basement one with 5 rows of 6 desks already filled more than comfortably. 31, Miss Myers kept mumbling over her double chin. 31, 31. No one else here has more than 29, and I have 31. She finally decided to put the desk next up against the side wall near the front. Just there for now. Leslie? It's the best we can do. This is a very crowded classroom. And she swung a pointed glance at Mr. Turner, who was retreating from the room. Sorry. Leslie waited quietly until the 7th grade boy who'd been sent down with the extra desk scraped it into position hard against the radiator and underneath the first window. Without making any noise, she pulled it a few inches forward from the radiator and settled herself into it. Then she turned once more to gaze at the rest of the class. 30 pairs of eyes were suddenly focused on the desktop scratches. Jess ran his forefinger around the heart with 2 pairs of initials, BR and SK, trying to figure out whose desk he had inherited. Probably Sally Koch's. Girls did more of the heart stuff in the 5th grade than the boys did. Besides, BR must be Billy Rudd. And Billy was known to favor Myrna Hauser last spring. Of course, these initials might have been there longer than that, but just in case. Jessie Aarons, Bobby Greggs, pass out the arithmetic books, please. And on the last word, Mrs. Myers flashed her famous first day of school smile. It was said in the upper grades that Mrs. Myers had never been seen to smile except on the very first day and the very last day of school. Jess roused himself and went to the front, and he passed Leslie's desk. She grinned and rippled her fingers low in the kind of a wave. He jerked a nod. He couldn't help feeling sorry for her. It must be embarrassing to sit in the front when you find yourself dressed funny on the first day of school, and you don't even know anybody. He slapped the books down as Mrs. Myers directed. Gary Fulcher grabbed his arm as he went by. "You gonna run today?" he said. And here he is. Picture in here of the class looking at, I'm assuming, I don't know if that's going to be Jessie who's passing out the books or if that's a picture of Leslie as she's going to the front of the classroom. It's the only picture in the book, though. So Gary asks him if he's going to run today. Jess nodded his head. Gary smirked. "He thinks he can beat me, the dumbhead." As he thought this, something jiggled inside Jess. He knew he was better than he had been last spring, but Fulcher might think he was going to be the best now that Wayne Pettis was in the 6th grade. But he, Jess, planned to give old Fulcher a surprise come noontime. It was as though he had swallowed grasshoppers. He could hardly wait. Mrs. Myers handed out books almost as though that she were President of the United States, dragging the distribution process out in senseless signings and ceremonies. It occurred to Jess that she too wished to postpone regular school as long as possible. When it wasn't his turn to pass out the books, Jess sneaked out a piece of notebook paper and he drew. He was toying with the idea of doing a whole book of drawings. He ought to choose one chief character and do a story about it. He scribbled several animals and tried to think of a name. A good title would get him started. The Haunted Hippo? He liked the ring of it. But how about Hereby the Haunted Hippo? Even better. Or The Case of the Crooked Crocodile? Not bad. What you drawing? Gary Fulcher asked, leaning way over his desk. Jess covered the page with his arm. Nothing. Aw, come on, let me see. Jess shook his head. Gary reached down and tried to pull Jess's hand away from the paper. The Case of the Crooked... Come on, Jess, he whispered hoarsely. I ain't gonna hurt nothing. He yanked at Jess's thumb. Jess put both arms over the paper and brought his sneaker heel crashing down onto Gary Fulcher's toe. Yow! He said. Boys? Mrs. Meyer's face had lost the lemon pie smile. He stomped my toe. Take your seat, Gary, she said. But he... Sit down. Jesse Aarons, one more peep from your direction and you can spend recess in here, copying the dictionary. Jess's face was now burning hot. He slid the notebook paper back under his desktop and put his head down. A whole year of this. 8 more years of this. He wasn't sure he could stand it. The children ate lunch at their desks, and the county had been promising Lark Creek a lunchroom for 20 years, but there never seemed to be enough money for one. Jess had been so careful not to lose his recess time that even now he chewed his bologna sandwich with his lips shut tight and his eyes on the initialed heart on his desk. Around him, conversations were buzzing. They were not supposed to talk during lunchtime, but it was the first day, and even the monster-mouthed Myers shot fewer flames on that first day. She's eating clabber, 2 seats up from where he sat. Mary Lou Peoples was at work, being the second snottiest girl in the 5th grade. Yogurt, stupid. Don't you watch TV? This was from Wanda K. Moore, the snottiest, who sat immediately right in front of Jess. Yuck. Lord, why couldn't they leave people in peace? Why shouldn't Leslie Burke eat anything she darn well pleased? He forgot that he was trying to eat carefully and took a loud slurp of his milk. Wanda Moore turned around all priss-faced. Jesse Aarons, that noise is pure repulsive. He glared at her hard and he gave another slurp. You are disgusting. Okay. Bring, bring. The recess bell, and with a yelp, the boys were pushing for the first place to the door. The boys will all sit down, oh Lord, while the girls line up and go out to the play yard. Ladies first, said the teacher. The boys quivered on the edge of their seats like moths fighting to be freed of their cocoons. Would she ever let them go? All right now, if you boys. And they didn't give her a second chance to change her mind. They were halfway to the end of the field before she could even finish her sentence. The first 2 out began dragging their toes to make the finish line. The ground was rutted from past rains, but had hardened in the late summer drought. So they had to give up on sneaker toes and draw the line with a stick. The 5th grade boys, bursting with new importance, ordered the 4th graders out of the way, while the smaller boys tried to include themselves without being too conspicuous. How many of you guys are gonna run? Gary Fulcher demanded. Me, everyone shouted. That's too many. No, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd graders, except maybe the Butcher cousins and Timmy Vaughn. The rest of you will just be in the way. Shoulders sagged, but the little boys backed away obediently. Okay, the leaves. 26, 27, stand still. 28, oh, you 28. Greg? Fulcher asked. Greg Williams, his shadow. Right, 28. Okay now, we'll have eliminations like always. Count off by 4s. Then we'll run the little ones together and then the 2s. We know. Everyone was impatient with Gary, who was trying for all the world to sound like that year's Wayne Pettis. Jess was 4, which suited him well enough. He was impatient to run, but he really didn't mind having a chance to see how the others were doing since spring. Fulcher was a 1, of course, having started everything with himself. Jess grinned at Fulcher's back and stuck his hands into his pockets of his corduroy pants, wiggling his right forefinger right through the hole. Gary won that first heat easily and had plenty of breath left over to boss the the organizing of the second group. A few of the younger boys drifted off to play King of the Mountain on the slope between the upper and lower fields. Out of the corner of his eye, Jess saw something come down from the upper field. He turned his back and pretended to concentrate on Fulcher's high-pitched commands. "Hi," Leslie Burke had come up beside him. He shifted slightly away. He said, "Aren't you running?" "Later. Maybe if he didn't look at her, she would go back to the upper field where she belonged with the girls." Gary told Earl Watson to bang the start. Jess watched. Nobody with much speed in that crowd. He kept his eyes on the shirt tails and the bent backs of the runners. A fight broke out at the finish line between Jimmy Mitchell and Clyde Deal. Everyone rushed to see the fight. Jess was aware that Leslie Burke stayed by his elbow, but he was careful not to look in her way. "Clyde!" Gary Fulcher made the declaration. "Clyde was the winner!" "It was a tie, Fulcher," the fourth grader protested. "I was standing right here." "Clyde Deal." Jimmy Mitchell's jaw was set. "I won, Fulcher. You couldn't even see from way back there." "It was Deal." Gary ignored the protest. "We're wasting time. All threes line up right now," he said. Jimmy's fists went up. "Ain't fair, Fulcher." Gary turned his back and headed for the starting line. "Oh, let them both run in the finals. What's it gonna hurt?" Jess said out loud. Gary stopped walking and wheeled around to face him. Fulcher glared at Jess and then at Leslie Burke. "Next thing," he said, his voice dropping, "next thing, you're going to want a girl to run." Jess's face went hot. "Sure," he said recklessly. "Why not?" He turned deliberately towards Leslie. "Do you want to run?" he asked. "Sure." She was grinning now. "Why not?" "You ain't scared to let a girl race, are you, Fulcher?" For a minute, he thought Gary was going to sock him, and he stiffened. He must have let Fulcher suspect that he was scared, too, a little bit, with a belt in the mouth. But instead, Gary broke into a trot and started bossing the threes into line for their heat. "You can run with the fours, Leslie," he said loudly enough to make sure Fulcher would hear him. And then he concentrated on the runners. "See," he told himself, "you can stand up for a creep like Fulcher. No sweat." Bobby Miller won the threes easily. He was the best of the fourth graders, almost as fast as Fulcher. But not as good as me, Jess thought. He was beginning to get really excited now. There wasn't anybody in the fours who could give him much of a race. Still, it would be better to give Fulcher a scare by running well in that heat. Leslie lined up beside him on the right. He moved a tiny bit to the left, but she didn't seem to notice. At the bang, Jess shot forward. It felt so good. Even the rough ground against the bottom of his worn sneakers. He was pumping his arms good. He could almost smell Gary Fulcher's surprise at his improvement. The crowd was noisier than they had been during the other heats. Maybe they were all noticing. He wanted to look back and see where the others were, but he resisted the temptation. He would seem conceited to look back. He concentrated on the finish line ahead. He was nearing with every step. "Oh, Miss Bessie, if you could see me now," he yelled. He felt it before he saw it. Someone was moving up. He automatically pumped harder. Then the shape was there in the sideways vision, and then suddenly pulling ahead. He forced himself now. His breath was choking him, and the sweat was in his eyes. But he saw the figure anyhow. The faded cutoffs crossed the line before him, 3 feet ahead before him. Leslie turned to face him with a wide smile on her tanned face. He stumbled and without a word began a half walk and half trot over the starting line to the starting line. This was the day that he was going to be champion, the best runner in the 4th and 5th grades, and he hadn't even won his heat. There was no cheering at either end of the field. The rest of the boys seemed to be stunned as he was. The teasing would come later, he felt sure of it, but at least for the moment, none of them were talking. "Okay," Fulcher took over. He tried to appear very much in charge. "Okay, you guys, you can line up for the finals." He walked over to Leslie. "Okay, you had your fun. You can run up and do hopscotch now." "But I won the heat," she said. Gary lowered his head like a bull. "Girls are not supposed to play on the lower field. Better get up there before one of the teachers sees you." "I want to run," she said quietly. "You already did." "What's the matter, Fulcher?" All Jess's anger now was bubbling out. He couldn't seem to stop the flow. What's the matter? Are you scared to let her race? Fulcher's fists went up, but Jess walked away from it. Fulcher would have to let her run now. He knew it. And Fulcher did, angrily and grudgingly. She beat him. She came in first and turned her large, shining eyes on a bunch of dumb, sweating, mad faces. The bell rang. Jess started across the lower field, his hands still deep in his pockets. She caught up with him. He took his hands out and began to trot towards the hill. She got him into enough trouble already. She speeded up and refused to be shaken off. Thanks, she said. Yeah? For what? He was thinking. You're the only kid in the whole darn school who's worth shooting. He wasn't sure. He thought her voice was quivering, but he wasn't sure to start feeling sorry for her again. Oh, so shoot me, he said. On the bus that afternoon, he did something he had never thought he would do. He sat down beside Maybelle. It was the only way that he could make sure that he wouldn't have Leslie plunking herself down beside him. Lord, the girl had no notion of what you did and you didn't do. He stared out the window, but he knew that she had come and was sitting across the aisle from them. He heard her say, Jess, just once, but the bus was noisy enough that he pretended that he hadn't heard her. When they came to a stop, he grabbed Maybelle's hand and dragged her off, conscious that he left Leslie right behind them. But she didn't try to speak to him again, nor did she even follow them. She just took off running towards the old Perkins place. He couldn't help watching. As she ran, as though it was in her nature, it reminded him of a flight of wild ducks in the autumn time. So smooth. The word beautiful came into his mind, but he shook it away and he hurried up towards his own house. All right, that was chapter 3. So he thought he was going to be the fastest kid in the 5th grade, but it turns out that his new neighbor, Leslie, a girl of all things, beat him and all the other boys at their foot races. I hope you enjoyed that chapter. I did. All right, see you guys soon. Bye.